mentally exhausting too, especially like the first year or so when everything's so new to you.
And you don't have the physical conditioning.
Exactly.
I don't think people understand how physically demanding the craft is.
People said to me that my body will get used to it, and I'm still waiting for that to happen.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, live from the Builder Show in Las Vegas. What is this, the number 6 show, Jeff? Yeah, this is the 6th show we've recorded live from the show floor. And I'm joined by Rob Wadsack, Digital Brand Manager.
Good morning.
And Elly Hart, Carpenter.
Hello.
From Canada.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here, both of you.
Thanks for having me on.
So Elly is one of our brand ambassadors and is a recent, would you not call it a graduate, but you recently completed an carpenter apprenticeship program.
I did in Canada, yes.
And how long did that take, Elly?
It's a 4-year program officially, which means 7 weeks of training per year for 4 years, and then the rest of the time is work experience.
on the job.
For a total of 6,480 hours.
How would you describe that experience?
It is nothing like what I imagined it would be.
Uh-huh.
When I first signed up for it, I pictured myself one day sitting inside like a heated garage with chisels and hand planes. The reality is so much more different to what I had pictured.
So what kind of stuff were you building if it wasn't like timber frame joinery?
It was joinery. Actually, I was interested in it at first because I started like mucking around with furniture and building little things out of hardwood. That's where it started. But then I ended up in this program, and you know what they start off with? They start off with concrete formwork.
Yep, you got to start the foundation, right?
Exactly. They start off with concrete formwork, which is, I had never heard of formwork before, and it blew my mind because everything's in reverse. You're building molds for something that you then take apart. Yes, you're using wood, but at the end, you're not left with that wood. It's being removed.
Sure.
So that was, like, I got in there and I was like, what am I doing here? This is not at all what I pictured myself doing.
So tell me, the first day, your first assignment was what? I know you remember.
Concrete formwork. We got given this really like crude sheet showing a wall form and a footing form, and I came into this with zero experience in the trades whatsoever. I didn't know anybody in the trades, and so I was looking at this, and there's a whole bunch of math that you have to do with it too, and math was a terrible subject for me in high school. I barely scraped through in math, and I really was like, I think I made a really big mistake.
And you've changed your mind about that now?
Well, I stuck it out because I made a really big sacrifice to sign up for this. I had a full-time job that was steady, and I walked away from that with the support of my partner to have a go at this. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I was beyond the point of no return.
You just got to stick it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what drew you to the idea of being in the construction trades specifically?
I liked working with my hands. So I was working as a journalist and an editor for several years. When I left Australia, my employer found a way for me to bring my job with me, which was great because it meant I didn't have to go around trying to find a job.
Sure.
But then it meant that I was working alone from home, hunched over a desk every day. I did that for 3 years, and I stuck it out for 3 years. And so just to distract myself, I started doing things around the house. My partner was mortified. He was like, babe, you know we don't own the place. We rent, right? We're going to put everything back when we leave. And I'm like, don't worry, I'll take care of it.
So what did you do to your apartment?
I started taking like the shelves out of the cabinets. Actually, there was a Fine Homebuilding, I'm pretty sure it was a Fine Homebuilding article that I read that showed you how to install, instead of having shelves in your cabinets, you can build a box and have a pull-out drawer instead.
Yes.
So that's what I did. I went to Home Depot and I started researching all these, what do you call it, the pulls, the glides?
Yes, yep. Door slides.
And there is an unbelievable array of these glides, and I'm like, this is like so much more than I thought it would be. I just like think that you'd go there'd be one type of glide and it would make it easy for you. No, you guys should talk about that actually in the magazine. It's tough just shopping for materials.
Yeah, we've talked about doing a piece on the options with regard to drawer hardware.
You know, I actually, just on the way over here, I was wandering around the show floor, and I was over at the Blume booth, and they've got a new electric line of drawer slides.
So you can open the drawer with your phone?
Or you
Well,
press a button?
They're pressure sensitive, so you push gently on the face of the drawer or door,
Yeah.
and it has servo motors in there.
What could possibly go wrong?
I don't
So
know.
does that mean it has to be hooked up to power
Oh
the
yes,
whole time?
the whole thing's
It's
wired
all
up.
hardwired in, right?
Yeah, but I would say the average person experience with materials is probably whatever they can find on the shelf in their local big box store.
Yes.
But walking around this place, you realize there's so much more
Yeah.
than that, and the only way to learn. I mean, now at least we have the internet to learn about that stuff. But prior to that, the only way to learn about that stuff would be to go to the really good local building supply places, and someone there had to be knowledgeable.
And they had to be trained by the hardware manufacturers often. So tell me, what kind of work are you doing now? You're they call it a journeyman carpenter in Canada?
Yeah, so once you complete the program, you sit an interprovincial exam. And that exam, once you pass that, once you get all of your hours, once you get signed off by the person who is sponsoring your apprenticeship, then you sit this exam, and if you pass, then you get your certification as a Red Seal carpenter. And there are, a lot of the certified trades in Canada are Red Seal trades. So, yeah, that's what I did.
And what are you working on now?
So right now, I'm working with a company that primarily focuses on multifamily builds and renovations. Yeah.
And so you're framing, or still doing formwork, or all of it?
I'm there from start to finish. I see it all from start to finish, which is why the whole process is so fascinating to me. It's really selfish in many ways. I just don't want to make more problems for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we do part of the framing. A lot of the work does get subbed out. Obviously, all of the mechanical and electrical trades, we don't do any of that. But we're on site, typically kind of as the framing is wrapping up, or we're there to assist the trade that is doing the bulk of the framing, and then we go in and do the back framing and do all of the quality
What
checks.
does back framing mean?
So putting backing in.
For drywall?
Backing for drywall. Well, that should technically be. It's included in the the scope of work for the framers, but more often than not, part of our job is to go around and make sure all of that stuff gets put in the right sequence. Because you can't really put backing in the ceiling before you do the fire blocking, because then you just got to take it back down.
Right.
And then it's because we're also doing adaptable units, we have to provide backing for grab bars in the bathrooms.
Sure.
And a big thing is also clear dimensions from wall to wall.
I'm sorry, cleat?
Clear.
I got you.
Sorry, my accent.
No,
clear
I just
dimensions.
didn't understand.
Yeah, so this has been a real big headache for us because we're in downtown Vancouver. The land sizes are not big, but they're trying to squeeze as many units as possible into.
Because there's a severe housing shortage, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they're trying to squeeze as much as possible into these spaces. And that means that you're working with minimum dimensions for everything. You put your plywood on the wrong side of the line, and all of a sudden you might get called on it. We have headroom issue. Headroom is a really big issue for us as well, because the structural engineers will come in and say, because of this and this, we're going to put this size beam in, but then it becomes an issue at headroom because the architect has only allowed for this amount of clearance, and it becomes a conflict. So then you got to try and work with what's there. There are times when we've had to pull out beams, grind off hangers to move them back an inch. That's how fiddly it is. And even in some cases where it's not possible to do that anymore, we have to work with the drywallers and say, we've got to figure out a way to put a chamfer on there so that it clears, because they won't pass us otherwise.
Oh, wow.
Man.
Yeah, you were talking about how strict the dimension requirements are. You mentioned there was some parapet on a roof that you had to chop down.
Oh. Yeah,
she just sighs.
I'm not really at liberty to talk too much about that, because the information I have is based on my own observations on the job site. I'm not privy to a lot of the information that comes down from the top. So, but the understanding I have with this situation is that there's a building height requirement that the city has, based on some an angle off the street.
Yes.
And it depends on which side of the street you're facing. So this parapet is 6 inches above this angle, this line.
And you guys had to fix that.
And the city says, we will allow you to get away with this much given the stage of construction that you're at, and it's going to be a lot of work, but this we can't let you get away with.
And so how far along were you when this was discovered?
So this was just before drywall. And there were
I'm
other things too.
I'm a little heartened to learn that, like, even in these big commercial projects, there are headaches. It's like,
I wonder that too. Sometimes I wonder, is it just our job site?
No, it's every freaking job site everywhere.
Yeah, and it's hard to talk about too because it's sort of like, you know, like people start pointing fingers and the buck gets passed around, and you want to know, how do you prevent this from happening again? And that's the question that I'm often asking is, how do I make this less of a pain in the ass for myself in the future?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we were talking about that the other night when you were out with us at one of our events, and we were trying to figure out, well, I mean, humans are imperfect, and relationships are complicated, and people have different agendas or different work styles. And so, yeah, what do? It's like you just have to start anticipating those situations and finding the best way to deal with them, whether it's direct or whether it's a little more covert, like, you know, buttering up someone or getting someone's the right communication style. But sometimes it's just out of your control.
It
right?
is. It really is. And that's like the best thing and the worst thing of the job. That, like, the people, you can't get through the job without the people, and you depend on these people. But these people also create so much of a headache sometimes, and you don't have that control. Like as a carpenter, am I supposed to be going around
and supervising
other
peers,
trades to make sure that my job as a carpenter isn't as much of a pain?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's something that's more of an issue on these bigger job sites because there's so much going on at once. It's impossible, I feel, to just stay on top of everything.
So if you were offered the chance to get a more supervisory role, you know, at some point in your career, would you want to do that? Or would you want to keep your hands on the tools? Because I think it's a dilemma that a lot of people who enter the craft are faced with, and then if you want to advance, you find you're doing work that you don't like anymore.
No. When I started working in carpentry, I never imagined that, I thought I would be on the tools forever. Like carpentry, in my mind, is being on the tools.
Yep.
But then in the context of building homes, the people on the tools are the people who end up being the best people to then manage those jobs too. I think carpenters especially, they're so knowledgeable about all aspects of the build, as opposed to, say, the plumber or the electricians, where their scope of work is very much defined. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I learned once I started working in the industry, is that my boss, the project managers, they're all carpenters, mm-hmm. and they're now off the tools. But I had a discussion with someone who is a superintendent on another really big multifamily job site, and he said, you have to decide at some point, you cannot be on the tools and also be in a management position.
Yep.
It's too hard.
Yep.
So it's a dilemma that I've been thinking about lately, is what does this mean for me in the future? You know, because I do feel like there's room. I feel like I'm very particular about processes and finding efficient ways to do my own tasks.
Yes.
So I'd love to be able to apply that sort of thinking to the larger picture of the job. Mm-hmm. So that part excites me, but that does inevitably mean getting off the tools at some point, which I don't think I'm ready to do.
Right.
And my boss knows that, and he's respectful of that. So we sort of have this understanding where he knows that I'm interested in the process, so he includes me in the process with all of the consultants and the engineers and the other trades, while he makes sure that I have tasks that still also has me on the tools. It keeps me satisfied in that way.
That's cool.
I mean, especially for smaller remodeling and home building companies, walking that line is a common scenario, because when you are at a small scale where you're only working on one house at a time, you can get away with it probably your whole career, even if it means you're less efficient at everything that you do.
Totally, yeah.
We see people struggle, though, with that, because you either need to run a business or a project, or you need to do the work. I think it's very difficult, unless it's a very small project, to do both. It's different skills, right?
So what can we do?
I don't know.
You know, I used to resist being in a management position. I was a lead carpenter 15 years ago on a bunch of job sites, and I would always feel like I got to get the job done. I got to get this trim up. I got to get this siding up, and my bosses were getting frustrated with me because I wasn't allotting the time to take care of some of the essential...
The business part.
Especially with the subcontractors.
It's a full-time job on its own.
Oh, yeah.
It really is.
At least.
Yeah, at the very least.
The custom home builders I know, they work 50, 60 hours a week because they have to.
Yeah, and it's amazing to meet other guys at the show who are in those positions, and I ask them how they do it, and they all say, I don't know. We just... Our lives, our professional lives revolve around the job and making sure everything that needs to get done to get to the finish line happens. But it's not easy, and even just from what I've seen, looking at the people that I report to, I don't know. I don't see myself enjoying that necessarily. It seems really, really stressful.
Nor would I.
You know, I think, because like you said, you fell into this multifamily section of the business. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's that someday you'll move into a different segment of the business, because that's the one thing about construction is that it's very nuanced in the different markets and client base and type of buildings. You know, like we know people who build timber frame homes every day, and they are doing what you thought your job was going to be.
Yeah.
And they are working in barns, building mortise and tenon joints. They're doing the same steps in the same order, but they're working on a different scale with different materials, with different tools, and with a different bunch of people. And one thing I really find it to be true is that each of those segments of the market has a different culture and it attracts a different type of person. Yes. So, I mean, I've worked in a lot of different areas in that, and the one thing I realize is that the more experience you get, the more you understand what it takes to get the job done, what it is that you enjoy or what satisfies you. And then I never wanted to be in a management position, but once I started knowing more and having more experience, it was satisfying to me to enable other people to go through that same process for themselves, starting from scratch.
Yeah. I did a post a little while ago about...
On your Instagram?
Yeah.
Do you want to plug your Instagram account?
Maybe at the end.
Well, how about right now?
It's Elly the Apprentice on Instagram. I've been on there for maybe 3 or 4 years, and
that's how we were introduced to you.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And like I did a post a little while ago, and someone told me a story on the job site where on the last job that the last employer he worked for, the superintendent was he had nailed down the process to the point where once the drywallers come on site, he would get all of them to line up in the morning before they're allowed inside, and he would check each one of their pouches to make sure that they were using the right length screw for the kind of work that they were doing for that particular day.
Cool. That's my kind of guy.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, is that micromanaging, or is that what it takes to get the job done right?
I think when you're working with potential knuckleheads, anything you can do to eliminate risk, you should do it.
But that's the thing. Like, does nobody deserve the benefit of the doubt anymore?
I don't know.
Well,
it's just like so many problems.
I like to give the benefit of the doubt, but then I've realized that you have to be picky about those situations. You have to sort of understand what the risk is, like what's the potential consequence of getting this wrong. So,
well, with the screws, you're going to put it through a pipe or wire.
Yeah, and also for us, it's also a matter of sound attenuation. So if you're using screws that go into the res channel and go into the wood, then you're short-circuiting it. And that's a big problem for us on multifamily, where we're working with bare minimum in terms of STC ratings as it is.
Sure.
Yeah, I get worried about it because I've lived in apartments. I know how much of a pain it is to hear the neighbors next door.
My guess is that superintendent or foreman that you mentioned probably had a problem in his past that he's like, I have to make sure this doesn't happen again.
He had a bad experience. Yeah.
But you make a good point. I was talking with a couple of guys at the Keep Craft Alive event last night, and they were talking about how there were some people that they've seen in owning home building businesses who were like, why would I want to train my guys to do that? Why would I want to send them? Why would I want to give them all these resources? Because then they're just going to want to leave. And I'm like, well, the guys were like, well, maybe if they start to respect you because you're empowering them, maybe they'll actually want to stay.
They'll want to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good leaders. are hard to find. When someone asks me, like, how do I find a good job when I want to get started, I say, look for a good boss. Don't look for a good job. The work might be exactly the kind of work you want to be doing, but if your boss is an asshole, you're not going to want to be working for them.
Right.
Yep.
You're going to want to leave. And mentorship is such a huge part of this industry. Mentorship and training go hand in hand together. It's not like a lot of desk jobs. You really need that mentorship. And if you can't trust or respect the people that are supposed to be looking after you, then that's a problem.
What else would you tell people who are considering a career in the trades, either from like a career switch or, they're young and getting started?
Construction. See, I feel construction is one of the few remaining industries where you still go around knocking on doors, literally for jobs. And that to me
You mean showing up on a project? And
showing on up a job site and say, hey, give me a chance.
Yep.
Yeah. And if you have no experience whatsoever, which was my case, that's a really intimidating idea. And I felt that
for
option,
you or for the person who might be hiring?
For the person who might... No, for me.
Yep.
And also it'd be a risk for the person taking you on if they don't know anything about you. Mm-hmm. And often you show up to these places without a resume and you just say, hey, look, I'm here, I'm visiting for a little while, I'd love to just, get a job, like work for a little while. And it's a tough thing for, I guess, both the person who wants the job and also for the employer to take that risk. But I don't know, like, I would say do your research. I know that a lot of job ads that get posted in the construction industry are often like 2-sentence things. There's no like company logo, there's no
discussion
information.
of culture.
Yeah, there's like you really like I honestly feel that the best situation would be to try and get onto the job site. Even if you hear about the job over the internet, try and get speak to them on the phone and then get to the job site to get a feel for what it might be like. Because that vibe, you pick it up right away. And if your spider senses are saying, there's something about this place that doesn't sit well with you, then trust your gut.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Because there are a lot of toxic environments out there, and that's why I say it's really important to find a good boss who is a good leader with a crew that respects that boss.
And each other.
Absolutely.
Yes. So
the culture aspect, I think, is a very undervalued part of the trade.
I totally agree. We were talking about that yesterday with the economist from Home Advisor, and there's so much emphasis on skill, on being able to do that job, but you also have to be able to work with the people around you, because a house does not get built typically on its own. No,
on your own. Yeah,
dozens of people at least, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
is your company a union shop or not?
We are not union. No, I have never worked for a union. So when people ask me that, I say my opinions are biased because I've never worked for a union. I tried to get into a union when I first started looking for jobs fresh out of school, and nobody was interested. Like, it's almost like you had to know somebody who was already in there to get in. Yeah.
I've heard that.
Yeah. But the union, at least where I am in BC, it's not as strong as I think as it is on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. Especially in the carpentry trade. I would say like the vast majority of carpenters in BC are non-union. And you don't have to be in a union to do the training. You don't have to be in a union to go through an apprenticeship.
So who's sponsoring the apprenticeship? Is that Canadian run?
It's provincially based. So the Red Seal is an interprovincial standard that applies across the country.
Yep.
But each province has its own program set up that aims to meet the standards of the Red Seal. So they're all working toward the same goal, but they're sort of all run independently and even within BC or whichever province, between schools it's run differently. Yeah, so the experience that you'd have in BC, I think, is pretty different to what you'd get, say, out in Ontario.
So do you get paid or do you have to pay for the training, or do you get a wage while you're learning?
Some employers will pay for your training. Mine didn't. Mm-hmm. But the government has tax grants and tax credits set up. So in the end, my apprenticeship ended up costing me nothing. Like, if anything, the government paid me to go through the apprenticeship.
That's pretty exceptional in the work world. Am I right?
You have to look for them. You have to be diligent about applying for them. But once you have all of that in place, it's really easy.
And how many folks are going through that program annually, would you guess, the carpentry program, apprenticeship?
The school that I went to is really well known for its trades programs, and they do a whole bunch of them. And
where was that, if I can ask?
BCIT.
Okay.
Yep, BCIT was where I went, and I did a Google search for carpentry apprenticeships, and that's the school that came up, and that's where I ended up.
Awesome.
But then I found out afterwards that it's a really good school, and so my experience is maybe a little bit different to what a lot of people in the rest of Canada or the rest of the United States and even around the world would go through. But yeah, like it's in each class there's 16 students. There's typically 2 classes running per semester, and then there's 4 levels per semester. So there's, at any given time, there's hundreds and hundreds of students, and there's a waiting list for this particular school too. You have to kind of get in there early.
And how closely did you work with your classmates, and did you build bonds with them,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because your work, it's only 16 students, so you do get to know each other pretty well.
Sure.
And there are group projects that happen while you're in those classes as well. So
Were most of the students pretty sharp?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a competitive thing, but you do like inevitably get people who are only there just for the ticket, just for the piece of paper, because they want to get off the tools and they think that that's the best way to get off the tools.
So was there diversity of age and gender in your class?
So when I did first and second year, which I did together as part of the pre-apprenticeship, there was one other woman in the class with me. She dropped out after 2 weeks.
What happened?
I don't know. I think the plan was for her to, I think personal circumstances led her to leave at that point. Mm-hmm. But I think the plan was she wanted to come back and finish it. It is fun. The school is it's intense. It's really intense. Like I found it really. I had a part-time job while I was going through level 1 and 2, and it was really hard. There's just so much homework and so much reading, which is amazing. Like, I don't know if you've seen, but like I posted a story once where I had all of my folders for school lined up. It's literally like a crate full of binders and textbooks that was mandatory reading in order to get through this program.
Was it? Were they good materials?
It was.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is maybe a little bit outdated. Like some of the techniques that they used for, like building stair spindles, I don't think is something that you would do today. Like putting dovetail joints into the ends of the spindles and sliding them into the treads.
But that's a cool thing to know how to do.
It is a cool thing to know how to do, and it teaches you skills that even if you may not end up using them day to day on the job site, it teaches you skills that do end up applying in other areas.
Sure.
So it is useful, yeah.
Have you had any contact with folks in the other trade training, electricians, plumbers, what have you?
While I was in school?
Yeah.
No, typically no. It's just so much going on, and each like the carpentry building itself is where the shop is. It's a big hangar, not as big as this place, but it's a big hangar, and every level has multiple students in there at any given time. So we're sort of separated from the other trades, but the trades school is more or less on one end of the campus. So you do end up having lunch with other trades. Yeah.
That I'm kind of fascinated. I'm still stuck on the boxes full of binders, because how many carpenters that you know, Patrick, do you think learned by reading about carpentry?
I can't think of any.
Yeah, that's
except for maybe reading Fine Homebuilding magazine.
I know. I just wanted to build things, and I was given all these books to read.
You were like, "What's the deal, man?"
I know. I'm like, I did not expect, but that's something that I learned along the way. Is carpentry is it's a technical, it's a skilled trade, right? At the end of the day, there are technical components of the job that I think may not apply to every carpenter's job out there, but in order to, meet the Red Seal standard, that was part of the scope of training, was to be able to do everything from formwork to finishing. Even though I think it's crazy, it's the scope of the trade is so broad.
Yes.
It's a blessing and a curse. Like, there's opportunities to move into different areas of carpentry, which is great, but at the same time, it's like, what defines a carpenter?
Yeah, and there's so many carpenters out there that it's like that never touch a piece of wood, or that's only a tiny portion of their job because for some reason, because everything's connected through the framing and the finished work of the house, you somehow contact every other trade. So it only makes sense that the general contractor or the builder is a carpenter primarily, but that is only a tiny fraction of what especially a smaller builder would be doing every day.
Yes. So what I like about working on these, being on a job from start to finish, is you do get to make use of a lot of those skills. You get to practice all those different areas. So that's something that's good about, I think, working on like working for a GC. And there are a lot of the carpentry work, at least where I am, is primarily with GCs.
So when I was a carpenter, I absolutely hated working on my own house on the weekends. Do you have that same feeling, or do you want to do your own projects or make furniture or timber joinery like we were talking about earlier?
Well, when I first started, so like when I was first like, I want to do this, I was like really stubborn about it. Once I put my mind to do something, like it's really hard to stop me. So I set up a dust tent in the mezzanine of our place. Much to my boyfriend's dismay, he was horrified. He's like, this was meant to be my man cave, and you've turned it into a wood shop. So I got those spreader bars. You know, at Harbour Freight Tools, they have these like truckless spreader bars. I got those, and I used that to hold the poly up. And then I put a zip door on it, which I thought was really cool. I found a zip door system. And then it was just an absolute, I didn't have a dust extraction system or anything like that. I just had a vacuum. But I set up this tent, and that was where I did all of my work. But then when I started working in the field, like after I finished my apprenticeship, it became really hard. Like I would go to work and I would be on the tools. It'd be physically like tough work, often in the rain or whatever. And then I would come home and I would be like, you know what? I need to just
chill.
I need to just sit in front of the TV and not do anything for the next 4 hours and then go to bed. It's physically exhausting and mentally exhausting too, especially like the first year or so when everything's so new to you. Yeah.
And you don't have the physical conditioning.
Exactly.
I don't think people understand how physically demanding the craft is.
People said to me that my body will get used to it, and I'm still waiting for that to happen. I don't think it ever will. It's really hard.
And you also have to think about, and I think, nowadays there's a lot more awareness. Like we saw that airframe exoskeleton thing
which is really cool.
Yeah.
That sounds wacky to me.
Did you go check that out?
No, I haven't.
Go on our
Instagram.
We got a little video with Addison.
So you think that's cool too?
But yes, it was cool because it's like straight out of the movies. It's like iRobot, but it's not what I thought it was. It's essentially, I thought it was like you could lift 600 pounds with this thing repeatedly. But how he explained it was to help take the fatigue out of repetitive movements when you're lifting lighter objects.
Can you think of an example in your career where that would have been useful and helped you?
Every day.
Really?
All the time. Especially like I really try and avoid getting up on a ladder as much as possible. So I actually went recently, this is a really stupid story, I'm laughing at it now, but I bought these. Have you ever heard of those stilts that kids use to like jump up really high?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I initially looked at getting drywall stilts to do all of this fire caulking that we got to do before the drops go in, and it means getting a ladder, moving it like 2 feet to do this, and then doing that pipe, moving 2 feet this way. And I was just like, there has to be a better way to do this. So I went on Craigslist. And as I looking around for these stilts, and there was these stilts that this woman had posted. She's like, my kids use it for like 5 seconds and they got bored of it. And so I looked it up, and it's these stilts where you can like do tricks by jumping up really high. So I was like, how high is it off the ground? Could I maybe even hang doors with this?
Yep.
Being a short person, it's always a challenge trying to find like a 2-foot step stool.
Sure.
And so I bought this thing off Craigslist, and it is like the worst decision that I've ever made.
Can you do backflips with it?
I did not even try. Like, in order to even stand up on this thing, I had to sit on the table saw and strap myself in. And it's not like drywall stilts. Drywall stilts, you can kind of stand still and be steady. This thing is like yoga on stilts. You have to be like moving and balancing the whole time. So unless you're holding on to something, it's really dangerous. And I actually fell like a few times. Nobody saw it, but still, I was like, this is not something that I can tell my coworkers about and say, hey, if you want to go and do a bunch of fire caulking 301, take those stilts with you because you'll probably die. But I'm always looking for tools to help me on the job. I leverage is something that I need as someone who doesn't have the same build or body strength or muscular endurance as a man would.
Well, and what I was getting at with that, bringing that topic up, is that, yeah, we can, like, some people are stronger than others and can do stuff easily, but I worked at a cabinet shop where this 20-year-old kid would, like, throw 3/4-inch sheets of plywood up onto the tables, and we're like, if you keep doing that, by the time you're 30 years old, you're not going to be able to lift that sheet of plywood.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have carts, we have levers, we have lift tables. It's like, if you got it, why don't you use it?
Is that part of your training? To
What?
like not kill
Throwing
yourself.
3/4 sheets of
well,
ply.
no, to not kill yourself, right? Like how to
It is.
how to have a career and not like a few years of.
On the job site, it's not as good. On the job site,
It's get the job done.
it's get the job done, absolutely. At school, it's a different story. You cannot get into the shop without your hard hat, your safety boots, and your safety glasses. Like, you have to walk within the yellow lines, basically. But yeah, like in school, they really emphasize that. So I found that after my 7 weeks of training and I'd go back to work, I would be really good about putting all of my safety gear on because I had it. But then inevitably, you end up, something needs to get done right away. You got to that's part of the struggle, is trying to get everything set up in order to even begin the task.
Yeah.
And that's the part that really frustrates me sometimes. Finding power on the job site, oh my goodness.
Yes.
It's such a struggle.
When I started hearing about cordless table saws and cordless miter saws, I said, really, what's the point of that? Because you set it up, but what I heard over and over again is there's such a shortage of usable outlets that it's awesome to be power independent, right?
Yes, it's like at that stage of a job, typically it's a temporary power pole.
Yeah. And you're sharing it with other trades.
Every trade needs a plug, and then someone there are times when I've spent like hours trying to figure out who I can unplug so that I can go and sawzall out that stud. Like, it was just, it can be such a struggle trying to figure out how to not screw somebody else over on the job.
I just started pulling out extension cords.
Screw it, they'll deal with it.
Yeah, but also, I mean, even
My
just
job's more important.
even just being at whether or not you can find the power, it's like if you're doing small jobs, the time it takes you to go unroll a cord and then roll it back up when you're done, it can become a significant portion of the time you spend on that job.
Yeah, it is. I think, I would say you get given a task, and I would say like a good at least 40% of that time is just setting up and packing up at the end, if not more. And
people wonder why construction is so expensive.
And why it takes so long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure having you on here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. Do you got anything to add?
No, I think that was a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me. This
Thanks
is
all.
a wild
Please.
experience being at the show too.
Well, actually, before we go, I mean, yeah, I was emailing with you before the show, and you'd never been down here, and I say this to everybody, and I've only been here a couple of times, that like it's gonna be more than you expect, no matter what you think you're coming into here. This builders show.
People warned me, bring comfortable shoes. It's really big, but the scale of this show is beyond my wildest imaginations. Like, there's 3 halls with 1,500 exhibitors, and that's not even including the kitchen and bath portion.
Right.
It's all rolled into one. Each hall is like the size of a small city, and there's multiple levels. There's education sessions happening at the same time, and it's wild. Either you need to make the show smaller or you got to make it longer.
Are you going to come back?
I don't know. Vegas is one of those things. Like, I think one time is a good time.
Well, next year it's in Orlando, so
Is it?
go to Florida, go to Disney World.
Okay, we'll see.
Universal's better.
We'll see.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to all of you for listening. Stay tuned for more from the International Builders Show later today.